Greetings and a very, very happy new year. Happy 2021 to all of you. This is Dr. Sonali Kataria, and I am so happy to start my year with this awareness program, which is awareness for nutritionists and dietitians, which is an initiative of NUTROSPECT. So, a special thanks to NUTROSPECT for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this Autism Aware Nutritionists program. Um, and I am going to be talking about an overview of the autism spectrum disorder, ASD as we call it. Um, a little bit about myself before we start. I am the co founder of a non-profit organization that is called Sunrise Learning Foundation. I am extremely blessed and privileged to be able to um, manage an organization that works for empowerment of people who are on the autism spectrum as well as their family members. Um, and some introduction about my qualifications. I have been privileged to have worked at All India Institute of Medical Sciences for 6 years and at Maulana Azad Medical College for another 2 rich years. I also got a chance to do a training in the Sunrise program at the Autism Treatment Center of America, USA. And I have done an observership and a fellowship from the Department of from the Department of Cell Biology and Neuroscience at the University of Melbourne from Australia. All these experiences, all these courses have given me immense knowledge and a lot of richness to my work experience. However, I still believe and feel that my greatest qualification has been motherhood. And my children have taught me way more than any other course in this entire world. On that note, let's begin with our topic. We are going to talk about what is autism, how can we identify this condition. So we'll have a quick run through with the developmental milestones and what are the red flags that we need to look for during this milestone passage. We also understand some assessment tools that are used to evaluate a person or a child who seems to be on the autism spectrum or seems to be at a high risk for autism, and then how to make a diagnosis. In a very, very brief way, we can go through the etiology and the pathophysiology and the course and progression of ASD. More importantly, we will be understanding the core deficits in autism, the neurocognitive theories that determine autism, that define autism. And perhaps we could talk about working towards empowering people with autism. So, coming to the very idea of why are we trying to understand autism, because understanding of anything brings more awareness, and awareness leads to more acceptance, and as acceptance builds up, it leads us towards inclusion. So our prime objective is to bring in inclusion. And what better way than to bring in more awareness and more information for the very people who are at the core of helping families with autism, that is nutritionists and dietitians. So I'm really honored to be speaking to you about autism. Uh, Taking a look at the developmental milestones, we can see how a typical child develops right from 2 months up to 5 years on various areas or domains of development like gross motor, fine motor, language, and social and cognitive skills. Now, what happens is um, a lot of observation, a lot of close observation on the part of parents, of course, who are the primary caregivers, along with siblings of the child, the grandparents, the peers, and the caregivers in the school. So, a lot of observation from all of them is required to be able to identify or look for or recognize the slightest of deviations in this developmental pattern, in a typical developmental pattern. So it is all the more important to bring in awareness of each and every person who could be a part of a child's life, for helping that person to develop more awareness and to be able to recognize those little red flags in the developmental pathway of a child. For example, if a child does not respond to his or her name by the age of, say, 6 to 9 months, it could be a red flag. If the child does not give big smiles or warm, joyful expressions, or rarely smiles when approached by caregivers, it could be a red flag. If a child does not imitate your expressions by the age of, say, 1 year, it could be a red flag. If a child shows delayed babbling or a repetition of sounds, ba 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 ba, mama mama, if that is delayed, it could be a red flag. If the child does not gesture to communicate, no finger pointing with the finger, if the child does not use his hands to express non-verbally, if the non-verbal communication is delayed or lagging, it could be a red flag. If the child does not give good eye contact, doesn't smile in reciprocation, if you're smiling and the child does not know how to respond to that smile, if the child has poor joint attention. What is joint attention? Look at that aeroplane, look at this doggy, look at that ball, wow. So if the child is not able to look at whatever we are trying to show him, it could be a little red flag. So all these little back and forth things that the child is trying to develop a bond and a connection with his environment, if those things are lacking, it could be a red flag. The child is showing less interest in the peers or in the group of children who are sitting around him. If the child does not reach up when the parents try to pick him up, if the child doesn't raise his hands, it could be a red flag. If the child shows a little delay in the motor development, some delays here and there. If the child has difficulties in going to sleep, if there is motor restlessness during sleep, if the child has excessive energy and is not able to wind down to go back to sleep, it could be a little red flag. If the child does not have a meaningful play with the toys, doesn't know what to do with the toys, or plays in an unusual way. If the child has difficulties in understanding facial expressions or responding to facial expressions, if the child is walking on toes, if the child is not pointing, like I said, using the finger to point to that balloon, I want that red balloon, if the child is not using this and the finger, it could be a red flag. Any kind of regression, if the child had begun to imitate, had begun to take out sounds, had begun to look at you, had begun to give a social smile, and suddenly it is beginning to regress, it is a red flag. It is a red flag. If the child shows absolutely no fear of danger, absolutely no fear. Most of the children do find it difficult to understand what is danger, but then there is an unusual visibility of, there is no sign of fear or no understanding of danger, it could be a red flag. If the child has excessive fixations for water or water bodies and cannot control himself and has to jump into a water body, it could be a red flag. If the child is overly sensitive to sounds and gets startled with sounds consistently, regularly, if the child shows some unusual motor movements, or like flapping of hands, wiggling of fingers, rocking of body, shaking the head, movements like these, which are restricted or repetitive, of one particular kind and repetitive. The child is doing them again and again and again. Like I said, flapping of hands, wiggling of fingers, rocking the body, head banging, sometimes head banging. These are all red flags that need to be looked into more carefully, observed, reported to the pediatrician, and also considered for evaluation, further evaluation. Similarly, if the child does not show a clear interest in toys that usually children are very interested in, or plays with toys in a way that is a little unusual, like is always stacking, making big towers from objects, or lining up objects in long queues. So an unusual kind of play, or there is a clear lack of symbolic play. Symbolic play means any kind of game in which there is some imagination required, some pretend play required. So for example, we are trying to put the doll to sleep, so there is no sleep, and the child doesn't know how to play that game. So there is a clear lack of imagination or pretend play. It could be a red flag. If the child is abnormally fixated with his own company, which means the child is mostly withdrawn, detached, maybe lost, maybe sort of seems to be in a bubble, or the child is not bothered if the parents are coming home, if there is somebody who's come after a long time, say grandparents, or if the child is not really bothered about what's happening all around, there is any kind of excitement or something is going to happen, so the child seems to be in his own world, then it has to be seen as a red flag. So these deviations in the developmental milestones, or any variations or unusual presentations, they have to be considered as red flags. They should be noted down. They should be discussed with the pediatrician, and if needed, a further assessment may be done to evaluate the possibility if there is any developmental problem. However, all these red flags do not by any chance give you any kind of clue to the diagnosis. No, these red flags are only for the parents, the caregivers, the grandparents, the peers, the siblings. These are red flags for them to be aware of, so that they know that if a child is showing any such deviations or lags, the child needs to be understood better, and these can be helped, these can be worked on. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, is also on its way to develop such screening modes. But the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended a screening of all children during the regular visits at 9 months, 18 months, and 30 months. In addition, the children also need to be screened specifically for ASD at 18 months and 24 months. Specifically for ASD is something that the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended. Additional screenings, if needed, can be done if the child seems to be at a high risk. So, say, for example, if there is some child in the family who's on the spectrum. Now, Bholu is our hero, little hero. He has always helped us to understand autism better. And Bholu is our little window into the world of autism. And if any of you have been to any of my talks or lectures before, or sessions before, you know Bholu very well. If you don't know, I'll introduce Bholu to you. So Bholu is an 8 years old boy. He is active, smart, happy-go-lucky boy, but sometimes he is hyperactive. He's distracted, he's running around, he's jumping, he's throwing things, he's climbing and then crashing down. He's always on the move. And he seems to be disconnected, detached, withdrawn, lost, as if he's not in sync with his environment, with the people around him, with the activities around him. He is on the autism spectrum. And Bholu is our little window into this world of autism. He helps us to understand autism better and develop an awareness of autism in this beautiful world. Bholu does not speak hardly any words, and he does not communicate either through body language or gestures or expressions. No. In fact, he's not able to point to objects or anything that he wanted to show. And he could not follow the pointing of his parents, whatever they were trying to show him. Look at that aeroplane, or look at that dog, or look at this balloon. Oh my God. No, Bholu is not looking there. He does not respond to his name when called out. Bholu, Bholu. No. Say out of 10 times, he would respond 2 times or 3 times, but not always. Or Bholu is also not able to follow little instructions. Bholu come, Bholu stand up, Bholu sit down, Bholu open the door. He's not able to understand many of the instructions and he's not able to follow them. So this pretty much helps us to understand that he has difficulties in communication, in communicating his needs and in understanding what other people are trying to communicate to him. Now, Bholu also does not give eye contact when somebody is speaking to him or he is in a conversation with somebody. He is not in a conversation and so he does not give any eye contact to anyone. He doesn't even share small play, fun, laugh or smile socially or play with his toys meaningfully. He laughs, but he laughs in his own world, at his own jokes, in his own way, at his own timings. He does not laugh meaningfully when there is something to laugh about. So, and he doesn't even look in the direction of pointing, and he doesn't play with his toys meaningfully. Always. Sometimes, yes, occasionally he does. He gets anxious when lots of children come to play. In fact, Bholu also is not able to react or respond appropriately to many of the social events that are happening around him. He's not even aware of a danger that is very close to him. So you have to be very alert with Bholu and you have to keep removing him away from dangers because he does not have danger awareness. He seems to be in a bubble, sometimes withdrawn, detached, lost, disconnected. And this clearly shows that he has difficulties in the area of social interaction, in his social environment. Bholu also does many repetitive activities alone. He can line up toys or objects, he can stack up blocks, he can arrange blocks or things in specific patterns, in very specific patterns. And these are called stereotypical activities. He does some stereotypical activities alone. And that is a very, very big presentation of sensory disintegration that happens in autism. So, what does he do? He seeks a lot of visual and auditory stimuli. Some children do, some children don't. Some children avoid, some children seek. So, he will open shampoo bottles, he will enjoy the lather, he will open all the taps and watch running water. He will spin himself or see spinning objects, look at the fan. He will spin the wheels of a car. He will watch the lights flicker in a TV or in a microwave, or he'll watch the clock needle keenly. He will watch some typical patterns or colors or movements. He will emit some sounds to hear them. He will lie down and hear his own. He will throw some objects on the ground to hear the sounds. So these are some unusual things that Bholu loves to do. This is his seeking. Similarly, he also seeks pressures. These are called proprioceptive seeking. Proprioception is another sense that gives us body awareness. So since he is a seeker, so he will rock his body sometimes. Sometimes he'll spin his body. Sometimes he'll sit like a W. This is a W sitting position. Sometimes he'll switch the fan and light on, off, on, off. He'll run, he'll jump, he'll crash on the sofa, on the bed, he'll push the walls, he'll walk on toes sometimes. He can press himself against some hard objects. He'll try to squeeze into narrow spaces to get that body pressure or that calmness that he's seeking. He also has some fixations or obsessions or some very passionate interests, you can say. For example, if you take him to the mall, he'll keep climbing on the escalator. He wants to jump on the trampoline and never come out of it. He wants to jump into the water or the swimming pool every time he sees it. He loves his car rides and gets very upset if the car ride ends. He loves the screen and the videos that are flowing into it. Most of the children do that as of now. He loves to use the switches, the swings. He's overly obsessed with swings. He could be. These are all variable presentations. So this is Bholu who's helping us to understand all these challenges. He could be obsessed with beads or blocks or Legos or utensils or books or pens or bottle caps or even bottles for that matter. So all these fixations, obsessions are ultimately uh, leading to a lot of control battles. So the family is trying to say, let's go home, but the child is not able to get off the trampoline or the swing. So all these situations are leading to control battles. Bholu is also very anxious and he's often called a difficult child. So Bholu is anxious because he is scared of the sounds. He gets startled with the sounds sometimes, with the lights, with some touches, maybe with some smells, with people around him. He has difficulties in accepting new situations. He is very, very scared of going to the parties because parties have a lot of sounds, light, crowd, smell, people, and such uncertain situations. Bholu is also scared of sitting in the toilet seat, and he's still in diapers. He's struggling to learn to get toilet trained. Bholu also has difficulties in accepting woolen clothes or new clothes or certain textures or even socks and cap. So these are some strange challenges that Bholu has. And Bholu is not able to tolerate anyone touching his hair, or a head wash is a very, very tough task for him. Cutting hair is like a huge, humongous task. Cutting nails, washing the face, brushing teeth, mouth rinsing, gargling, these are such simple things that regular children and regular people do without even noticing that they are doing something. But these simple little things are the hugest reason of control battles in Bholu's family. He has limited picky eating habits. He is either able to eat very crunchy food or very soft food. Sometimes he does not at all want to take the roti bite inside his mouth, or bread, or fruits, or eggs. So these are some challenges that Bholu and his family is facing. Bholu is sometimes active till 2 or 3 a.m. in the night. His parents' social life is also cut off because of these sleep deprivation reasons. And because of this, there are so many control battles in the house, and Bholu has frequent meltdowns. Meltdowns. When Bholu cannot hold it any longer, he goes into a meltdown. The meltdowns happen anywhere. They can happen in the park, at the hair salon, in the market, mall, road, car, restaurant, movie hall, friend's place, wedding parties. So, pretty much all the social situations have become very, very difficult for Bholu and his family. So, Bholu has helped us to get a sneak peek into the world of autism. Thank you, Bholu. In older children, these presentations can vary. So, how else can ASD present? It can present in some very subtle forms. And sometimes the child seems to have a failure to understand age appropriate concepts, and the parents wonder, or the teachers wonder, why is the child not understanding? Sometimes they have big problems with academics. Sometimes the child seems to be daydreaming all the time. So the teachers say he's always daydreaming. The child could have an inattentiveness, does not seem to listen. The child could present with easy distractibility. So everybody thinks he's so easily distracted. He's unable to finish his task. He's not able to follow through instructions. The child could be making some careless mistakes because of all these things, and could present as forgetfulness. It could present as forgetfulness. The child could present as he is difficult to discipline, or he seems to be very strong willed. The child could have difficulties in playing. He doesn't understand what is happening. What kind of a game is this? The child could be presenting as if he doesn't understand simple instructions. What is wrong with him? Why is he not understanding a simple direction, a simple instruction that is given to him? He could have toilet training difficulties. He could still be having toilet accidents. He could be presenting with a lot of escape behaviors. Every time a particular kind of a task is given, the child begins to cry or hit, or shows some activity which can be labeled as hyperactivity. Or the child could be presenting as aggressive. It could be that the child is not able to control his impulses, or is not able to form functional relations with his social environment, or with his peers, or with his seniors. So, yes, the child could be presenting as mental restlessness, physical restlessness, attention deficit, hyperactivity. The child may be talking too much, or talking too fast, or too loud, or the child may be having some auditory processing difficulties. If you give a verbal instruction, the child might have difficulties to understand what was told to him verbally. He's not able to process it immediately. Or he could be presenting with echolalia. What is echolalia? Echolalia is when the child repeats exactly what you ask him. uh, the child could be slow to respond and act. The child seems to be not interacting, doesn't play games with friends, gets upset easily, cannot sustain attention for a long time, and so on and so on. So, this is an example of echolalia. The adult says, I want water, and the little one says, I want water. Instead of understanding and giving water, or trying to do something about it, he's going to repeat the exact same thing. And that's called echolalia, commonly presented. The child could also be having specific problems, like problems following directions that are spoken to them or shown to them. So, these are some of the presentations of autism that come to us as different or variable forms of manifestations, as ASD presents in children, and from children going on to older children. Now, let me share some eye opener facts about autism. These are some very, very important, and at the same time, facts that can blow your mind. Is it a big deal? Autism awareness. Is it a big deal? Yes. Yes, it is. 1 in 54 people, according to the CDC survey 2016, have autism. Estimated 3 to 5 million people are living with autism in India. And these are just reported cases, just cases that have been diagnosed and labeled and recognized. It's unbelievably big deal. It is a big deal. Another thing, children with autism grow up into adults with autism. It is not that they outgrow their autism. They do not outgrow their autism. They live with autism. Children with autism grow up into adults with autism. Another very, very unique thing about autism, if you've met one person with autism, you've met just one person with autism. Each person on the autism spectrum is unique, has a unique set of abilities and a unique set of disabilities. And that is why it is called an autism spectrum. It is an autism continuum, because there is a wide variation in the type and severity of symptoms that people experience when they are on the autism spectrum. And they experience them differently at different times. So, on the social continuum, on the communication continuum, on the behavior continuum, each person is unique and has a unique set of abilities and disabilities at a particular time. Now, who is affected with autism? Boys have boys have a very, very high ratio as compared to girls. 4 to 5 boys are affected as compared to one girl. ASD occurs in all ethnic, racial, and economic groups. There is no specific predilection for race or social categories. Now, the biggest question: what causes autism? If we identify and understand the cause, we are obviously getting closer to finding the management. Now, there are multiple factors that have been implicated to be causing or being causative factors for autism. It has a strong genetic basis, although the genetics is complex, and it is unclear whether autism spectrum is explained more by multiple gene interactions or by some rare mutations which cause major effects. So it is still not understood with great clarity as to what exactly causes autism. However, many factors have been uh, identified and are in the process of being identified. Another mind blowing fact about autism is that many people with autism spectrum disorder have difficulty processing everyday sensory information, such as sounds, sights, and smells. And it is extremely difficult to understand it till we experience it. And we can only do our best to try to understand how it feels. It is called sensory integration difficulty or sensory sensitivity or sensory dysfunction. It can have a profound effect on a person's life. So we have 5 senses through which we get all the information from our environment: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And there are 2 more senses that work inside the body to give our brain the information from inside the body. So one of them is balance or the vestibular sense, which gives our brain a complete clarity about in which state we are and how to maintain the balance of the body. And similarly, the proprioception sense, which gives us information, which gives the brain information about where this joint is, where this joint is, where this joint is, or about all the joints, about all their muscle and the bone positions, so that we can always maintain our posture and we are always aware of how we are sitting and we don't keep falling around here and there. So, people with autism can be either hypersensitive for any or more of these senses, or can be hyposensitive for any or more of these senses. This can be explained by understanding a normal optimal arousal level. We are all in a normal or optimal state of arousal. So there is a certain amount of stimulus that can startle us, and there is a certain amount of sensation that can give us calmness. So we are in a balanced state of alertness in which we are aroused, and there's a certain level of alertness, and there's a certain level of calmness that we are in, and that balance is helping us to stay in an optimal state of arousal. But people with autism can either be in an high arousal state all the time. They are always at a high alert, overly anxious, always getting startled with sounds, with lights, with touches, or they are under aroused. They are at a lower level of alertness. So they need a lot of push to be able to receive the same information into their senses. So that makes it very, very difficult for them to process the information that is coming in from the environment or from their own bodies. And therefore, they have a sensory disintegration. They are sensory disintegrated. Very difficult to imagine how they get through each day. So if the sensory threshold is high, lots of sensory input is needed to meet their sensory needs. And if the sensory threshold is low, that person is actively avoiding sensory inputs to get overwhelmed by all the sensory inputs. So I hope I have been able to bring out this point. So this is called a sensory processing disorder or a sensory disintegration. So the person is either hypersensitive, that means he's having an extreme sensitivity to stimulation of the senses, to touch, to light, to taste, to hearing, to smell, and even to the internal senses. Or the person is hyposensitive, needs more input to feel what a typical individual normally feels. So may get hurt but may not realize it, may drop things and may not realize it, can have a hard time discriminating things by touch. So that's another, I would say, um, a big point to be understood when we are trying to understand autism. I'll skip this video. We can share it, and a couple of more things that can bring in a lot of information about autism. And that is, I'm sure everybody knows he's Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs has been thought to be on the autism spectrum with a great thinking mind, awesome perspective. And similarly, another single-minded, over-passionate person was Bill Gates, again thought to be on the autism spectrum. A very, very amazingly insightful person on the autism spectrum is renowned professor of animal sciences at the University of Colorado, and her name is Temple Grandin. She is one person who has given so much insight into the world of autism, into the brain of autism, into that bubble, that I don't think anybody else can. She has written so many books about her childhood, how she experienced things on the being on the autism spectrum, and how she how she was able to overcome those challenges and live up to her dreams of being who she is today. She is an amazing person and has been to many platforms. I have heard her personally, and I am a big fan of hers. Her name is Temple Grandin. Her books are amazing. Her work is revolutionary. She has revolutionized the way the cattle are kept at cattle places, and the way they can be more productive in terms of their milk outputs. So she has written a lot of books about animals and how best they can be reared and looked after, so that they can be of great use to human beings. The Autistic Brain is a book that she has written, despite having challenges in expression of language, and despite being on the autism spectrum, which means they have difficulties in communicating and difficulties in expressing themselves. She has been able to overcome a lot of these challenges, and she describes how. She has told everyone how. She speaks that I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. She was not able to talk for a very, very long time, approximately 6 to 7 years. I knew what I wanted to say, but I could not get the words out. So I would just scream. This is so insightful. And this is just one out of the millions and millions of insights that she has given us for us to be able to understand people with autism better. Now coming to the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders. How do we diagnose this condition? So it is a spectrum umbrella with autistic disorder, with Asperger syndrome, with PDD, which is atypical autism. PDD is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, and childhood disintegrative disorder, CDD. So all these come under the spectrum umbrella. Diagnosing ASD is definitely a challenging task because it is based on a lot of observation. It is based on a lot of discussion and interaction with the primary caregivers, mostly the parents, and which is called the developmental surveillance and the developmental screening, which is done through a lot of asking questions. Then a screening tool is called MChat. There is a screening tool which has some 20 questions and they are answered, and high risk or a low risk or a no risk is then finalized. And for the diagnosis and evaluation, some tools are available. Autism Diagnostic Interview Revised, ADIR, Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, ADOS 2 is now available. Childhood Autism Rating Scale, also called CARS, and Indian Scale for Assessment of Autism, also called ISA, and the DSM-5 criteria. These are all tools that are available to diagnose autism. ISA is again Indian Scale for Assessment of Autism, CARS, DSM-5 criteria for the autism spectrum conditions. ADOS is Autism Diagnostic Observation Scale. Now, the symptoms of ASD can be clubbed into these DSM-5 criteria, and there are 3 categories of symptoms. The first category is difficulties with social interaction, socialization, anything to do with the social environment. The second is impairments in communication, in both non-verbal and verbal communication, in both to and fro communication. And the third category is restricted, repetitive, and stereotypical patterns of behaviors, interests, and activities. Associated sensory processing disorders. So this is what the DSM-5 criteria tells us about the symptoms of autism. And these symptoms then can be categorized as being in the level 1, in which the person requires support. Level 2 requires substantial support, and level 3 requires very substantial support. So that's for the severity of the ASD level. Now, DSM-5 and ICD-10 again bring forth the core features of ASD, the clinical features of ASD, which are again clubbed into 3 main categories: difficulty in language or communication, so it is verbal as well as non-verbal communication; difficulties in social interaction; and restricted or repetitive behaviors. These are the 3 main areas in which autism presents. And what are the functional areas which get affected because of this spectrum being on the spectrum? Another functional area in case of children is there's a clear lack of symbolic play. There is a clear lack of symbolic play, which is a very important prerequisite for diagnosing autism in children. So going to etiology and pathophysiology, which is a constantly evolving field. We are all still searching for answers. So let's look at all the factors that seem to be contributing to create this autistic phenotype. So a lot of research and studies in the last few years have shown that there are some prenatal factors that could be contributing to ASD. One of them is maternal infection, rubella, and some maternal drug exposures, specifically valproic acid. There are some environmental exposures like heavy metals, lead, methyl mercury, arsenic, PCBs, organophosphates. Exposures to these environmental toxins could be possibly contributing to bringing about the autistic phenotype. There are some genetic factors that could be contributing: single gene disorders, Fragile X syndrome, which is considered to be a high risk factor for ASD. Similarly, tuberous sclerosis, again a high risk factor, and Rett syndrome. Inborn errors of metabolism like PKU, phenylketonuria, and some common genetic variants and alleles. There are some unknown etiological factors which have been are being studied that are contributing to bring about the autistic phenotype. And paternal age, children born to older parents, especially father, may have a higher chance for developing autism in the child. Environmental toxins and exposure to heavy metals during pregnancy could be one. Family history, if there is a child in the family who has been on the spectrum, it could be another factor. Premature children, premature who have a low birth weight, are more likely to develop ASD. And some chemical and metabolic imbalances, a disruption in the hormones or chemicals, can ultimately bring about impairment in brain development cascade, which could lead to autism. Now, coming to the most evidence based theory that is being understood in the etiology and pathogenesis of ASD, and that is a combination of gut biosis and immune dysregulation, an interplay of gut dysbiosis and immune dysregulation. So, a gut dysbiosis in a little child or in a person can ultimately bring about an impairment of some fundamental biological processes like detoxification, metabolism, and immune function, and could lead to a neuroinflammation resulting in ASD. And this gut dysbiosis in the child could be a result of maternal gut dysbiosis, if the maternal gut dysbiosis, which could again in turn be because of some dietary factors, some medications or pharmaceutical exposures, toxin exposures, lifestyle reasons, some exposures to infection or paternal imbalances. So the maternal gut dysbiosis could be one reason for the gut dysbiosis in the child. Some prenatal exposures of the mother, say for example maternal paternal toxins and pathogens, microbes that could have been responsible for the gut dysbiosis in the child. Postnatal exposures of some dietary factors or medications could also be contributing to the gut dysbiosis in the child. And along with that, if there is an interplay of immune dysregulation, if there is immune dysregulation, say for example because of exposure to environmental toxins like mercury, lead, or pesticides, or an immune dysregulation resulting from perhaps some excessive vaccination, say for example of an immunocompromised child, or if there has been an improper administration or timing, or it could be because of other lifestyle factors, like for example some extreme stressful conditions that could ultimately result in an immune dysregulation, an interplay of immune dysregulation and gut dysbiosis in the child, which is then in turn leading to impairment of fundamental biological processes like detoxification, metabolism, and immune function, which ultimately is giving rise to a neuroinflammation, which presents in the form of autism spectrum disorders. This theory is by far the most evidence-based till date. Taking a quick look at the recent research that is happening, this is SEED, Study to Explore Early Development. SEED is a multi-year study which is funded by CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And it is currently the largest study in the United States that is helping to identify factors that may put children at risk for ASD and other developmental disabilities. Understanding the risk factors that make a person more likely to develop an ASD will help us to learn more about the causes. And once we get closer to the cause, we definitely get closer to how we can manage it best. Now, a study in 2020, a meta-analysis and a systematic review, has helped us to understand the composition of gut microbiota in children with autism spectrum disorders. And this systematic review and meta-analysis, which was done in 2020, has helped us to understand that there is a dysbiosis in ASD children, which may influence the development and severity of ASD symptomatology. And further studies are required in order to obtain stronger evidence of effectiveness of or probiotics in reducing autistic symptoms or presentations. So this study has, once again, where it has included 18 studies assessing a total of 493 ASD children and 404 controls or healthy controls. And this study has again brought forth that there is a dysbiosis, gut dysbiosis in ASD children, which ultimately brings about the development and leads to severity of ASD symptomatology. Now, another study in January 2021 brought forth the gastrointestinal involvement of autism spectrum disorder with a focus on gut microbiota. And this study again has helped us to has demonstrated that if we have a modulation of the gut microbiota, if we are able to modulate the gut microbiota in individuals who have GI disturbances, this could be a promising target for future medicine that could be used for addressing the challenges that we see in the autism spectrum conditions. Now, another study which brings forth the role of immune dysregulation in autism spectrum disorders is on cytokine aberration. Cytokines are immune markers, and this study showed that significantly altered levels of cytokines have been found in people with ASD as compared to healthy controls. So significantly altered levels of cytokines have been seen in people with ASD, and therefore helping us to understand that it is a play of immune dysregulation leading to a kind of neuroinflammation, which ultimately brings about this presentation of autism spectrum conditions. Now, we go to what are the core deficits that happen in autism spectrum conditions, trying to understand the neuroanatomy of autism and the theories which help us to understand autism better, the brain wiring of autism better. Now, ASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It may be due to a deviant brain development or by an insult at an early age. It affects emotion, learning ability, self-control, and memory, which unfolds as an individual develops and grows. So, looking at the autistic brain, there are 5 main brain areas that seem to be affected in autism. The frontal lobe is this part of the brain that helps us in all our executive functions, in all our expressive language and voluntary movements. So all the executive functions means planning, organizing, and doing a task systematically is brought about by the frontal lobe. And since it is affected, all these functions get affected in autism. Similarly, temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is responsible for helping us to hear, process what we hear, and then process it further, and then help us to act accordingly. And therefore, since the temporal lobe is involved, we have the people with autism have difficulties in communication, in understanding what is being communicated and then communicating further. Similarly, basal ganglia. Basal ganglia is that part of the brain which is responsible for the motor behaviors, what we learn and then how we do it. So the motor behaviors are affected because of the involvement of basal ganglia, and therefore people present with repetitive and restricted behaviors that they do in autism. Amygdala and hippocampus, these are the regions that are responsible for looking after the memory, the learning, and the emotions, understanding of emotions, processing of emotions, regulation of emotions. And that gets affected severely in autism. And therefore, people with autism are not able to regulate their emotional responses. So they may or may not be able to laugh appropriately at a particular social situation, or cry or respond appropriately to a particular social situation. The brainstem involvement leads to difficulties in coordinated movements. So the autistic brain, we are trying to understand the autistic brain and the implications of the various parts involvement. Now, many studies have shown that people with autism, the brain has an increased volume and an increased weight. Uh, this is a SPECT scan study which shows a person with autism having a lesser blood flow to a particular area of the brain. And this is another study which brings forth that the size of the autistic brain is bigger as compared to a regular, typically developing brain, and which ultimately brings about structural changes in specific areas of the brain that ultimately impact language, communication, social interaction, interests, stereotypical repetitive behavior, sensory processing difficulties, and social imagination. Now, let us try to understand this a little better. So, initially, there were some studies that showed that there is an underconnectivity in autistic brains. However, um, more recent studies have suggested that, in fact, there is an overconnectivity in the autistic brain. So, if a typical brain has, for example, A, B, and C, three regions in which there are neuronal connections, and there is a clear wiring that is connecting these three regions, in an autistic brain, this connectivity is going to be more haphazard. But there are more connections. Each brain region is connected to more regions, and they are connected with lesser strength of the neurons. So this is a functional MRI, which is a simple illustration to explain the findings of the functional MRI. And when a typical brain shows strong connectivity, which are shown as thick blue lines in three brain regions, say, for example, A, B, and C. If you look at the autistic brain, these are thinner red lines that are connecting not just ABC, but they are connecting to other regions as well. So this is called overconnectivity. And so the organization of the brain connections seems to be different in an autistic brain. And this probably results from impaired synaptic pruning. I'll just explain it in my next slide. What is impaired synaptic pruning? And this impaired synaptic pruning, then pruning is trimming, cutting off all the extra things. When the plants are pruned, so that's called synaptic pruning. That happens in the first 2 years of life. When there is impaired synaptic pruning, all the connections that were there, some of them are pruned away. The ones that are not really needed are pruned away in a typically developing brain, which does not happen in an ASD brain. And when that does not happen, it leads to overconnectivity in the brain, which presents as the autism wiring. So most of the evidence so far has brought forth that after birth, synaptogenesis and myelination continues at a rapid pace until the end of the second year. At birth, each neuron has 7,500 connections when a child is born. And these keep increasing rapidly in the first 2 years of life until synaptic connections are double that of an adult brain. So the maximum synaptic connections are found at 2 years. And this is followed by pruning. Then the pruning begins to happen through the process of cell death. So the extra connections, the irrelevant ones, the redundant ones, the not so needed ones are then pruned away. And the important synaptic pathways are formed. The neuronal pathways are formed and established, which does not happen in ASD. The cell death does not happen in ASD. The connections are still there. Lots of connections are still there. And so there is an overconnectivity in the autistic brain. Neuroplasticity. Neurons and synapses that are activated repeatedly are preserved, while those that are not activated are pruned away. This early stimulation has an enormous impact on brain development, on behavior, on learning and memory. So all the connections that are being stimulated, a child is hearing, processing the information, a child is seeing something, processing the information, a child is smelling something, processing the information. So all the neurons and the synaptic pathways that are being used meaningfully are preserved, the others are deactivated, are pruned away. And this leads to all the learning that is happening in the early ages of life. This plasticity, when the neurons and the synapses are changing, they are evolving, they are learning, they are growing, the new connections are forming. So this is called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to adapt and learn and grow. This forms the basis for early stimulation. And this is affected in ASD. Now let's understand autism with respect to the three psychological theories called the neurocognitive theories: theory of mind, executive functions, and central coherence theories. Theory. What is theory of mind? Theory of mind is the capacity for anyone for empathy or understanding of what others want or how others must be feeling. So we have an ability to imagine or to understand how this person could be feeling at this particular point of time. This understanding that people don't share the same thoughts and feelings as you do, this understanding is called the theory of mind. And it develops during childhood. It begins to develop by the age of 4 years and keeps on developing as the social situations keep presenting themselves and the child keeps learning. And this is called theory of mind. Individuals on the spectrum have difficulty in appreciating that others also have thoughts, feelings, beliefs, mental states that are unique to them. They somehow, uh, they somehow are not able to empathize or understand exactly how the other person might be feeling. Even though they do begin to learn the theory of mind gradually over a period of time, but per se, an autistic brain has difficulties in appreciating what the other person might be feeling because they have difficulties in imagination and in theory of mind. So, theory of mind is a very important social cognitive skill. It involves developing a sense of what others are thinking. It helps us to form our responses because we respond accordingly. We respond as to how this person must be feeling, and that's how we respond. Our responses are based on our understanding of what others are expecting or feeling or thinking. That doesn't happen in ASD. So, for example, a dad is calling up his son who is at home, and the dad says, "What are you doing, Denzel?" And Denzel is saying, "I'm playing with this." Now, Denzel is presuming that dad knows what am I playing with. Denzel does not understand that dad is not able to see what he's playing with. So that is difficulty with the theory of mind in autism. And it is also referred to as autism mind blindness. Mind blindness. They have difficulties in reading the listener's level of interest. So if I want to sing a song, and if I am singing, I begin to sing, I am always looking at people's faces. And if I feel that they are not interested in listening to my song, I might just, stop it, or I might cut it short. But a person with autism might have difficulties in doing that. If he wants to sing or say something, he would want to do it irrespective of what the others want or probably feel. So they have difficulties in understanding misunderstandings. They have difficulties in deceiving or even understanding if anybody is trying to deceive them. They are very innocent. They do not understand deception. They have difficulties in developing friendships because of the same reason. These are such complex things. They are unaware of other people's thoughts, emotions, and desires, but they do learn to develop this theory of mind gradually. They do learn. There is a certain level of effort that is required to help them to understand contexts. I'll just come to it. And so they seem to be insensitive. They just seem to be insensitive to the feelings of others, because they are not able to form the appropriate responses to that particular situation. So if you happen to fall down, and a person with autism wants to say, perhaps wants to help you, but he would not know the exact way to respond, and he might laugh at that time because he does not know how to give an appropriate response to that particular social situation. So that is difficulty with the theory of mind, understanding how that person is particularly feeling and how I am supposed to respond in this particular situation. So unable to predict other people's behaviors, and they expect other people to know their thoughts, and they have a literal understanding of language. They can miss out on the sarcasm, the irony, the teasing. They miss out on those things because of the difficulties in theory of mind. And what impact does it have? It has an impact on their communication, because they are able to understand literal language. They are able to understand concrete things, and abstract concepts are difficult for them to understand. They sometimes miss out on the humor. What joke was it? Why is everybody laughing? And they cannot be sarcastic. It also has some impact on their behaviors. For example, they have very limited pretend play. They do learn gradually. They do learn, but yes, it is difficult for them. Similarly, they cannot lie. They don't know how to tell a lie. They always prefer routines and sameness in the environment, because that gives them a lot of predictability. Uncertainty makes them very anxious, because uncertainty means another complex social situation, and they wouldn't know how to respond in that particular social situation, what to do in that social situation, and they cannot predict what the other person is expecting or thinking. So they prefer sameness in environment, which is more predictable, more certain, and they find it very difficult to express and relate to emotions other than happy, sad, angry. More complex emotions, more difficulties for them to process, to understand, and to respond appropriately. The other theory, the second theory, is they have a lack of executive functioning. Now, what is executive functioning? As we said, the frontal lobe looks after our executive functioning. So, for example, if we have to brush our teeth, we know that we have to we know the steps. We'll switch on the light, open the door, look for our toothbrush, pick it up, look for the toothpaste, pick it up, open the cap, squeeze the toothpaste, put it on the brush, brush front teeth, brush sides, upper, lower, spit, and then maybe another round. And then we will put the brush back, put the paste back, we will open the tap, do rinsing of the mouth, and all those. So all those steps, we have complete clarity of the entire sequence of how we are going to do it. Since the entire map is ready in our brain, we are able to execute it step by step. This entire map is we are able to execute it step by step, because we have good executive functioning. But a person with autism has difficulties in executive functioning. So executing a simple task, breaking it down into smaller steps, and then executing it step by step in this organized, systematic manner becomes very difficult for them. So the simplest of tasks of, say, for example, getting a glass of water for themselves becomes difficult, because they are not able to make a map or a pathway that I need to pick up the bottle, open the cap, then pour water, then drink. They have difficulties in making this little pathway, this sequence. And so they struggle at these little tasks. And this struggle ultimately leads to frustrations, more struggles, and the vicious circle keeps forming unless they are helped in these particular areas. And awareness and understanding of these challenges helps the parents, the caregivers, the people, the professionals who are going to, be functional in helping them to overcome these challenges or work around these challenges so that they become more productive. Their every day becomes more productive. So these are some of the implications of having difficulties in executive functioning. These are some implications that this little boy is experiencing and sharing with us. So, how he has difficulties in completing simple tasks because of the difficulties in executive functioning. Like I discussed this example of simple step-by-step processes. And the implications of this is that they have difficulties in social skills, because all communication and language is heavily dependent on a step by step and a to and fro communication. So when a person is having difficulties in forming a particular sequence of speaking is such a complex task which has so many step by step tasks. You have to first create a list of words that you're going to say, then you have to have a sequence in which you're going to say, then you have to make your lips, tongue, palate ready, and then you have to execute it. You have to execute the same to be able to say that sentence. So this in itself becomes a lot of work. A lot of skill is needed to be able to say a simple sentence, because a lot of sequencing and organizing is required to bring that sentence out, to be able to execute it. And since they have difficulties, it becomes a struggle for them. So they have high levels of anxiety because of this unpredictability in the environment, and they may not be able to form the appropriate emotional response or an appropriate verbal response on an appropriate motor response, how to respond to that particular situation. And so they're anxious, and so they always have overwhelming feelings when they are exposed to unexpected changes. And so they always resort to doing some repetitive actions, some rituals that bring in predictability for them, that keeps them calm. The third theory that helps us to understand autism brain wiring is that they have a weak central coherence. What is central coherence? Central coherence is an ability to generalize what you learn. So ability to integrate small pieces of information and to create a big picture. So say, for example, you suddenly enter a room, a black, dark room, and then you see, oh, many people are sitting quietly. There is one person on the stage who's talking, who's showing something on a screen, and he's holding a mic. And so you quickly collect all these pieces of information and understand that this is probably a lecture going on in an auditorium. So I have probably entered an auditorium. So that's the big picture. And you quickly get the big picture and you respond appropriately to this social situation. And then you quietly come out. And then you say, oh, thank God, I've come out. But a person with autism may have difficulties in picking up all those separate pieces of information and clubbing them into the big picture and understanding that, oh, this is a lecture going on. He would probably look at a red chair which has a broken tag on it, and he would probably look at that person whose screen is showing some deviation or a flicker of light, or possibly the person is saying something which is hurting his ears, or there is a sound of a fan that is moving, or the sound of an AC, or a carpet which is irregular, which has some irregularities or some folds, and he has an extreme urge to make it straight, or there are some chairs which are lying irregularly. So he would be focusing on smaller pieces of information, which is called, they are focusing on details, and mostly on errors. These are errors, small errors in our environment, which we completely overlook. but they are more focused on those little details, and they're not able to create a big picture. So they have limited ability of making sense of an entire situation or an entire person as a whole, and they have difficulties in generalizing situations that they might have learned. So in the book they must have learned that when a lecture is going on we have to keep quiet, but that person is not able to generalize it to this right now situation. And another example that is very very well established for understanding what is weak central coherence in ASD is, if this picture, it is called an embedded picture test, and if we try to show this picture to a particular person and we ask that person to pick out a shape, pick out this particular triangle, this kind of a triangle from this picture, uh, a person who is typical, who has a typical brain, might struggle. He will see that there is a pram, I can see a pram, but I'm finding it difficult to locate this kind of a triangle. However, a person who is on the autism spectrum, if you show him this picture and you ask him, what is this? Would you want to say something? He will say, I can see 4 circles, I can see um, uh, 24 spokes, I can see this triangle. He'll be able to locate this triangle quickly without realizing that all these things are actually creating the picture of a pram. Yes, he'll have difficulty in looking at the pram, but he'll be able to locate the finer details of this picture. Similarly, another example is this alphabet that is written with smaller local alphabets that are given. So there is a global image and there are local icons. So a person with autism might be able to see that these are S S S S S, and if there is a broken S, he will be able to localize it immediately. But there is an H that is being formed globally, he'll be having difficulty. Or if there is a word that would have been written here like AH, that person may or may not be able to read it as quickly as a typical person would be able to do it. So that is what a weak central coherence is. So people with autism have difficulty in seeing the big picture, in seeing the complete picture. They have narrow interests. They have specific cause and effect associations. A very common, typical example is mom wore a red top when the family went to McDonald's. One day, we all went to McDonald's and mom was wearing a red top. The next time mom wore the same red top, the child kept saying French fries, French fries, French fries. And nobody is able to understand why is he saying French fries since morning. But the child is able to relate to that red top, and he has associated that red top with McDonald's. That's the detail that the child is able to focus at. This is just one example out of millions and millions of such examples that we come across every day. So this is weak central coherence. And so they have problems in seeing the big picture. They have poor common sense as in making sense of a social situation. And they then misinterpret or misjudge simple situations. So there is this triad of difficulties in social interactions, of difficulties in imagination and flexibility, and of difficulties in communication. And this triad has 3 theories that are acting to complicate this picture further, in which there is a weak theory of mind, recognizing thoughts and meanings of what people are saying and of making sense of the situation. Difficulties in executive functioning, which involves planning, monitoring, and generating solutions, problem solving, and a weak central coherence, making a complete picture, a big picture of the smaller, finer details. So this triad then explains the core deficits that happen in autism spectrum disorder. Another recently understood deficit or theory that comes up to understand ASD better is context blindness. They are absolute thinkers. They think in black and white. It is either yes or no. While this world doesn't run like this world is so subjective, everything is so relative, all the social situations are so relative. Like, for example, what do you do on Sundays? Do you have an answer for that? Do you have a concrete answer for that? It depends from Sunday to Sunday. Similarly, uh, what gift can you give to your mom? That depends. Every year, the gift changes on her birthday. It all depends on what she wants at that time. It all depends on what kind of weather it is, where we are living, where is she going. So there are so many factors that contribute to our creating responses. However, a person with autism has difficulties in understanding this complexity called depends. It depends on what. If a person asks you in a movie theater, oh, when are we going to McDonald's, and you say we'll go later. So later when? 2 minutes later, 1 hour later, 3 hours later, 3 months later. So if you say okay, we'll go after the movie, and as soon as the movie finishes, the person will be asking you, the movie's over. Are we going to McDonald's? So you have to have a very concrete answer to help that person understand when are we going to go to McDonald's. This is an example. Similarly, if you look at this figure over here, you could either, I ask you, what is this? You could either call it B, or you could also call it 13. But if I showed you this sequence, so you will definitely call it 13. This is 13, right? And if I showed you this sequence, you would definitely call it B. The shape is the same, the picture is the same, but you have taken into consideration the context in which this figure is appearing to you. So this context you could make use of and say this is either 13 or this is B. So it depends. Your answer depends on the context. You will always look at the context to give me an answer. A person with autism may not be able to look at the context. That's context blindness. That's absolute thinking. So they have difficulties in imagining what the other person is feeling or trying to indicate. They have difficulties in doing some of the simplest of daily tasks. They have some difficulties in sequencing smallest of tasks to complete one big task, shifting from one task to another, because that requires a lot of flexibility and a lot of sequencing and organizing quickly. And they have difficulties in seeing the big picture. They have high levels of anxiety due to all the unpredictability in the environment. So many things are so subjective. They depend on so many things. We don't have a concrete yes or no kind of a system. They are not able to accept unexpected changes, and so they get overwhelmed easily. They have some rituals and coping strategies with which they kind of retain their calmness. And those are called stims or isms. If you come across a person with autism, you would see that he tries to have a coping ritual. That person would be either using his book to keep himself calm and tuned out of the unpredictable environment all around him, or would be using headphones to listen to music, or would be doing something that keeps him calm and which gives him enough predictability to be able to cut off from the environment, because it is so unpredictable, the social environment, and be able to focus on something that gives him a lot of certainty, a lot of clarity on what is supposed to be done. So they have social anxiety and they have context blindness. And therefore, they have a lot of meltdown situations in transitions, all big transitions, very difficult for them. Change of place, change of house, even smaller changes are very difficult for them. Sometimes waiting is difficult. because in waiting they have to regulate themselves. Emotional regulation becomes difficult. Following instructions is difficult. Paying attention, focusing is tough. Staying still is difficult for them. Managing adequate distance from others is difficult. Privacy, concepts of privacy are difficult to understand for them because of all these reasons that we have looked at all this while. So now that we have been able to understand a little bit about what is autism, the core deficits that are there in the autism spectrum conditions, let's now look at the strengths. And mind you, these are unbelievable strengths. These are phenomenal strengths. The very challenges that, like, for example, these people are socially cut off. Yes, they are socially cut off, but these challenges can be used as their strengths when it comes to their employability. All employers look for these strengths in their employees. Let me show you how. So if they are socially cut off, yes, that person is not going to do any small talk, no gossip. He'll be focused on the work. No interest in the environment, very good. He'll be focused on the job. He'll complete his job. He's fixated with some things. Great. I need somebody who's passionate about at least something that I can give him to work on. Repetitive behaviors, fantastic. Then this person can do tedious tasks without feeling bored. I need a person for data entry. Fantastic. He has fixed thoughts and ideas. He's very rigid about it. So that means he's rule oriented. If you teach him a rule, he will not forget it. You might forget, but he will not forget it because he's rule oriented and he's a perfectionist. He'll complete that task completely. He's detail oriented. Very good. I want somebody to focus on the details and take out all the possible errors on this particular document. Or I have a set of gems and I want all the defective pieces out and categorized into a separate, not so expensive category. So accuracy, precision, focus on details, fantastic. They do not understand body language and gestures. No problem. This person will not have any bias. This person will not have any egos, will not be unnecessarily involved in redundant privileges. Great, fantastic. They think in pictures. Very nice. I need a person who's visually oriented and who can do this job in a more visually beautiful way. So the very challenges of autism can be used as their strengths when it comes to a specific workplace. So if we are able to empower people with autism and we are able to provide appropriate work opportunities for them, nothing can stop them. How can we connect with them best? What is the best way to connect with them? They connect best through structure and visual supports. Structure means when there is enough clarity in the environment, in the activities, and in their time, which means if they know what they have to do, for how long they have to do, where do they have to do, how do they have to do, they are sorted. That kind of structure. So just like we have a structure in a house, like we eat at a certain place, we take bath in a certain place, we sleep at a certain place, all this is physical structure. Similarly, we have time structures. So people with autism work best in structured environments. They work best in activities that have a clear beginning and a clear end. Vague games intrigue them, trouble them. They are very good with activities that have clear structure, clear beginning and clear end. They are very good with routines. They are excellent with routines. So if we give them and teach them a good routine, they are sorted. Similarly, they work best with visual supports. So if we are telling them things verbally, it might just disappear. They have difficulties in processing verbal information. But if we give them written down points, how to make a sandwich, take 2 slices of bread. It is written. Apply butter on slice 1. So if we write the points down, that is a very, very good support for them to do their tasks, because then executive functioning is easier for them. Theory of mind is easier for them. You have written down what you want. It is clear. It is visible. They don't have to imagine or kind of keep thinking what this person would be wanting. So you've written it down. So visual supports and structure. Predictability gives them a lot of mental preparation, physical and social preparation, and so they are very sorted. You can connect best with them when there is a lot of predictability in the environment, when there is certainty. If you say something, do it. If you have promised something, make it happen. They depend a lot on clarity. You tell them, this is my clear expectation, and if it is not done, this is the clear consequence. Clear expectations, clear consequences. Vague, they will not be able to understand. Simplicity, being minimalistic, too many words, too much information, too much clutter, they find it very difficult to process it. Sensory friendly environment, any environment in which they are not overwhelmed with the sensory information. They also need a processing time after giving an instruction. So whenever we give them an instruction, we need to have a latency period of, say, 30 seconds or so that they can process that verbal information and then give an appropriate motor or emotional or a language response. What else can we do to connect with them? We need to explain the context very clearly. If there is a particular kind of a social situation, we have to explain it. We cannot presume that this person would be able to understand it. Yes. And similarly, for all the complex social situations, if there is a funeral that we are going to, if there is a wedding that we are going to, if there's a birthday party that we are going to, if there's a lecture that we are going to, a class that we are going to, we have to explain the social situation. And we have to tell them clearly what is our expectation. And for transitions and social situations, we have to prepare them using social stories. We have to use follow through for instructions. We have to teach them good routines. They learn their mistakes. As against typical human beings learn from their mistakes. But people with autism, they tend to learn their mistakes. If they do it once, they feel this is the way it has to be done. So it should be errorless from the very first attempt. Consistency is very important for them because that helps them to bring more predictability, more certainty, and more routine. It helps to bring in routines. We need to use simple language, short, clear, precise, one language instruction. We need to use task analysis for a complex task. Say, for example, we have to teach them how to make a sandwich or make tea or organize a bag. We need to break that task into smaller little steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and write those steps down. That's called task analysis, and that gives them clarity, and they are able to complete those steps one after the other. That helps them, that keeps them sorted. And we need to keep the information concrete and to the point. If we are talking to them, we better be careful. We have to be to the point. And most importantly, they may or may not be able to vocalize or express their anxiety, or they may not be able to ask how long is this person going to sing. So we have to try and address and acknowledge if we feel that this person is having anxiety, and we need to keep it clear for them. So if we have gone to a movie theater, we have to keep telling them how long this movie is going to go on, and for how long do we expect that person to sit still or be quiet, or what can he do if he's not able to sit still, and so on. So clear expectations, clear consequences, clarity, predictability helps them to stay sorted. So once again, a lot of structure in their life and a lot of visual support. Preparation, predictability, certainty, and clarity is the best way to connect with people who are on the autism spectrum. And before we end this session, let's see what Temple Grandin has to say. She says, autism is an important part of who I am. I wouldn't want to change it because I love the logical way I think. Thank you, Temple Grandin, for helping us beautifully to understand autism with such amazingness. And she also says, I am different, not less. She says this for all the people who are on the autism spectrum. And with this, we finish this session. Once again, I want to say a very big thank you to NutroSpect for giving me this opportunity and this platform to speak to such eminent professionals like you, all the dietitians and all the nutritionists who are a part of this Autism Aware Nutritionist program. So happy to be a part of this initiative. And let us hope that we can all together lead this world towards more acceptance and more inclusion for people on the autism spectrum. Thank you very much once again. Huge honor for me to speak to you. Thank you.